reflection. I think what the story of Sisyphus, at the beginning, when you reflect, everything just looks absurd, but then later on the story changes. Like, I think Camus argues that Sisyphus consciously pushing the love with passion and love. So I guess how this transition happened.
There came a point that Sisyphus reflectively and happily pushed the rock up the hill. There are a couple of ways you can look at this. When you find yourself in a position in life where you just don't like anything that you're doing, or let's just say, let's say you're married to a man, and he comes home, he puts the food that you have cooked on his plate, and he goes and watches TV. And after a while, you hate making food for this man because just the way he eats, just the way he kind of treats the way you've made dinner, treats you, you feel it to be so disrespectful that you just don't like making food for him. But if you don't make food for him, he becomes violent. So what do you do? You can't divorce. And you can't not cook. Initially what happens is every time you open the fridge to cook, you do so with a good amount of hatred and disgust. And that's what Sisyphus initially does. There's a good amount of disgust. And then you do something which is really remarkable. You begin to change the psychological narrative. You say, I'm no longer going to cook with the intention of feeding my husband. I'm going to cook with the intention of just cooking. And I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to come home, change my clothes, go to the fridge, and pay attention to the way I open the door. Am I opening it too crudely, or am I opening the fridge door gently? And then how do I open the drawer in the fridge? How do I hold the onion and take it out? How do I put the onion on the cutting board? How am I cutting it? How am I holding the knife? How am I using the pan, putting oil, turning on the heat? And all of a sudden you realize that what you're doing is very much like what Sisyphus is doing, which is really to escape the hard and harsh reality of the fact that your husband doesn't care for you. He just cares for the food. He doesn't want to have conversation. It's kind of what, for 1,000 years the Christians would call the veil of tears. There's nothing in life that's good. There's nothing in life that's rewarding. It's all misery from birth to death. But what you've done is you have now changed the narrative, where you pay attention to your physical body and its relationship to the physical world. And you pay attention to all the movements. It's kind of like in many ways, it's kind of like the Gurdjieff, movements, especially the stop movement, where when he would scream stop, for example, not only did you have to stop your physical body from acting, from moving, you also had to stop your emotions, however you were feeling, and then the mental body, however you were thinking. Everything needs to come to a complete halt, And of course, you can't really do that unless you just pay attention to all the four bodies and make sure that they're all completely still. Some people would call this positive thinking, and it's really good if you can do that, if you can kind of trick yourself into making yourself feel good about some work that you're doing, which is quite futile, and meaningless. And you know how it's going to start and how it's going to live out and how it's going to end. And sometimes, in life you have no choice but to kind of change your outlook. It's kind of like when I talk to my father about anything. How was school? He asked. Are you driving home? Yes. So how was the class? It wasn't very good. Why? Well, I wasn't in a good mood. The students are not good. He laughs and says, Amir. These are young people. They have hopes. They have dreams. Inspire them. Excite them. I know you can do it. And, it's just a different side of the same coin. But I think I like Karl Marx's idea. Which is, in line to Muhammad's to some extent. If life is abusing you, Jesus would say, well, turn the other cheek. If on the other hand you're Moses or you're Karl Marx, you say, no, I'm not going to allow religion to become a drug that pacifies me. I want to stand up to this bully called life. And I want to change its imposition. I want to change its cruelty. I'm not going to keep turning my cheeks left and right and just watch my skin fall off my face, And I think it's good to be the follower of Karl Marx in this scenario. I think Camus is wrong. Because he says we are to assume that he's a happy hero, sometimes you have no choice. Sometimes the forces you're kind of fighting against are just way, way, way too big. You may not like Kaiser, but you don't have the power to quit just yet. What are you going to do with rent and healthcare and the rest of that stuff? It's true that they exploit you. It's true that they kind of take all your resources, energy and mental and all that. What are you going to do? Well, the only thing you can do at this stage in your life, really, if you want to kind of protect what little you have, including your sanity and peace of mind, is that you have to somehow convince yourself that you're doing this for the greater good. There are doctors, there are patients. These are like important information. What else can you do? Sisyphus can't do anything. He can't climb on a ladder, go to Zeus and say, I'm sorry for trying to figure out how I can become immortal. I didn't think that only gods can be immortal. I thought maybe human beings can as well. And I was envious of your immortality. I wanted to be one, he has no power to change the mind of Zeus, and he has no power to change the mind of Zeus in regards to the only task that he has imposed upon Sisyphus. You wake up and you push this rock up the hill. What else can he do? Initially how it starts really is that you don't know initially, how things are going to be. You actually believe that you can push this rock up the hill and just throw it over the cliff. I mean, you really believe that. You know, you believe that if you keep reading and reading and reading, you'll be wise. You know, you'll believe that if you keep giving and giving and giving and giving and understanding, your husband or your wife who happens to be alcoholic, they will quit. You know, initially you do believe. And then there comes a point where your belief system is challenged by facts, which is you've been pushing this rock up the hill for 5 years straight, or 5 months, or 5 days. What usually happens, you start fresh, then you slowly get exhausted. Then you have no choice but to just move out the way and watch this rock roll back down. And then you go back down, and you roll it up. But this time you're a bit more exhausted, so the rock can only be pushed up halfway. And the truth is, Krishnamurti is wrong. Memory serves you well here. You can't get rid of your memory. You can't say that, memory is a collection of experiences that now become obstacle to your growth. No, that's not the case. Memory kind of tells you, experience tells you that you stand no chance in pushing this rock up the hill. And then you become angry. Then you become resentful. I mean, you really get upset. I mean, at yourself as well, because if you had not become curious about immortality, if you were not that greedy, you live your life and you die at the age of 70, and that's the end of that. Nothing wrong with that. But no, you had to be greedy. You thought that life has some beautiful things to offer you, and you want to be like Zeus, always alive, And you don't understand life. You don't understand what it means to be human. You don't understand life. You don't understand repetitions. You don't understand death. And so you just allow greed and passion to kind of run you. What's your next option? You can't find the rock. You can't fight Zeus. The only thing you can do is just say, how am I going to wear my shoes? Let me pay attention. Let me pay attention to, my fingers on the rock, my knees as I push this rock up. And before you know it, and that's another trick, that when you pay attention to what you're doing, you live in the moment, you live in the present. And the present has no room for the future or the past. It is the present. And it's all because you're paying attention, And the nice thing about paying attention and being in the moment is that the self disappears. Because in Camus, because this is not the first time he writes the story of Sisyphus. He has told the story of Sisyphus in The Plague in a different way. He has also told the story of Sisyphus in his novel The Stranger. And they're all saying the same thing. In the, I think it's in The Stranger where where this Mousseau, he has killed some Arab and he's sitting in his cell, and this priest comes in. And there comes a point where Mousseau for the first time begins to reflect. And the moment he reflects, he's unhappy with who he is and what he is. And he really wants to kill the priest because he's become contaminated. Before he would just really be honest and just say, I don't want to do this and I don't want to do that. He just kind of wings life, He flows through it without much reflection. And he doesn't take responsibility for anything that happens in his life. Because there is no self. If there is no self, you're just going to live in life. No one can hold you responsible. But the moment someone pushes you into reflection, then you have to wonder, well, why did you do this? Why did you do that? What is wrong with you? I think most of us don't really have a choice but to play this trick on ourselves the way that Rousseau as well as Sisyphus did. In a few days I have to start working on updating the just various things for the department. It's going to be 60-75% resentment as I'm working on it, and there are 30% of times where I just forget. I'm just punching in. I don't even think. And then I get exhausted, my eyes begin to hurt, and I begin to use all these profanities. What am I doing here? What am I doing with this stuff? I don't really care. This is useless. This is the way to teach. This is not the function of education. And then you get caught where you actually find this stuff meaningful. And that's the worst thing that can happen to you. Sisyphus pays attention because what else can he do? Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre, they were very, very good friends for a while. Before French began to, or France began to dominate and really abuse Algeria. And that's where Camus and Sartre parted ways. And I'm sure you guys know the play much better than I. It's a play that Jean-Paul Sartre wrote called No Exit, or Other People Are Hell, where you have a few people in a room. I think it's Garson, Inez, and Stell. There are no windows, there are no doors, they're just stuck together in one place, and they need each other, and that's the thing, they need each other. And then, the man needs someone to tell him he's a hero. There's a woman who needs someone to tell her that she's attractive. Garson doesn't think this woman is attractive, and yet he desperately needs to be told he's a hero. Well, you have to fake it. If you want someone to tell you you're a hero, and you don't really much value the opinion of this other person, but you desperately need someone to tell you, you somehow have to make them feel important. So I know this doesn't do much for you. The truth is, it doesn't do much for me either. And I doubt it does anything for Stacey or Allison.
I didn't quite like that story either, but I think where I stuck was, how you can manipulate to think positively, but the other way is, when you say there's nothing to pursue in life, but you have to inject meaning into it. So, the nuance between the two.
I don't know if there's an easy way out. I think what makes Sisyphus happy is his ability to forget. I think when you forget, when you forget certain realities, certain limitations, when you forget them, then you'll be fine. You know, imagine, for example, that you've been in 5 relationships, and in all the 5 relationships, you've come to realize that there are certain parts of you that just fail to open up. You know, physically, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, you just don't want to open up. Because you know, once you open up, you will lose power, and the other person will have the power to hurt you, and you don't want to get hurt. Okay. The only way that you're able to move beyond and just be open is to forget. Maybe you're just very confident now, maybe you're okay with getting hurt, you know, but let's just say you're not. Because there is no way that Sisyphus can escape his fate. You know, the only way that you can open yourself up to another person is to forget. And to forget is to be very irresponsible on your part, because you know your past, you know your history, you know your limitations, and yet you decided to forget the question as well. Well, because to remember is painful. You know, it cages you, and you don't want to be caged. There isn't much you can do, but you certainly don't want to be caged. You know, you know, the other way you can look at this is that Sisyphus really came to realize that there is no escape. So he made peace with that. And the moment you make peace, you know, then you can kind of move on and be a bit more creative with how you want to approach the prison in which you live. You know. You know, I'm doing some backyard work, and I'm not using my right hand or my right shoulder. I'm just lifting everything with my left hand. And then as I'm working with my left hand, you know, I know that there's going to be some stress and pressure put on my right shoulder as well. But as long as I deceive myself and think that whatever I pick with my left hand will have no impact on my right hand and shoulder, I will continue to do it. I've been doing it for the past couple of days. And then, when I go to sleep, my right shoulder wakes up and says, I don't think I want to let you sleep tonight. And that's how it's been for the past couple of nights. And there comes a point where you say, you know, I don't care if I don't get any rest. I'm just not going to sit, you know, all day. I'm just going to go out there and do work, even if it causes me, you know, great amounts of pain. And I think it's a good place to be in life. You've made peace with misery. You've made peace with more misery. And, you know, you also are okay with being creative at the same time, paying the price for being creative, which is, you know, being in pain. There are lots of Sufi stories, you know. Some guy goes to this dervish and says, I hate my job. And the guy says, yeah, but you know, it's paying for your child's school, and it's paying for your wife, and it's paying for your in-laws and outlaws and, you know, middle-laws. And so, you know, in the Islamic tradition, guest is the friend of God. So your job is actually keeping all these friends of God happy. And all of a sudden that phrase, that little statement, you know, given by this dervish to this young punk, makes him really happy, and he goes back to work and stays there for the next 50, 60 years. You know, the way you think about life really has it has an enormous power to change your perspectives, but you have to believe in the things that you're imposing onto life. You know. And you have to play a lot of tricks. You know, when it comes to giving assignments to students, for example, I have done so many assignments myself as a student. I don't remember a single one. You know. And so sometimes when I give assignments to students, I say, well, this is completely useless. Why am I doing this? And then, you know, I have to play tricks. And the trick is, well, you know, it's like putting bricks on top of each other. You know, students will get a D, and then they'll improve, they'll get a C. You know, there is a woman who teaches humanities at San Francisco State. Apparently she had fallen into depression and she took some time off. There was this woman who used to teach philosophy. Maybe she's still there. She was awful. I went into a class just once as a visitor. Then there is other guy at San Francisco who teaches philosophy, and he has claimed to be a healer of sorts, where he can even chat with you on Zoom. He'll charge you some money, but he'll give you some profound transformative insights. These are all very educated people, you know. You know, you send your kids to Kumon, you send your kids to private school. You want to make sure they read and they write and they think and all that stuff. And you look around you. And you realize how difficult really it is. Not so much to be knowledgeable, but to be intelligent, to be mindful, to become aware and observant of things. Especially, you know, in this day and age where things are moving so fast, where people really don't get a chance, or don't even have the ability or the capacity to sit and look around and pay attention. And you say, well, okay, well, I'm doing all this stuff for my kids. For what? You know, then, of course, you have to kind of engage in some mental game with yourself that if you are able to make this a habit for your kids, make sure they do piano every day, make sure they do this every day, do that every day, maybe this habit can become part of who and what they are. And hopefully that will make them somewhat different from the adults around them when they get to be 20 or 30. It certainly helps you in thinking that way as a parent, because the flip side would be devastating. You'll just give up, you know. You know, and I think it's kind of like, you know, the negative is salt, the positive is sugar. You put too much sugar, the food will become not edible. You put too much salt, it becomes unedible. You don't put any salt, it's unedible. You don't put any sugar, it's unedible. So you just kind of have to just like play with this stuff. You know, you have to be hopeful as well as hopeless, I think. But I do think that because most of human experiences are on the negative side, because life is a bully that no one can stand up to. there is only, so much where you can be positive. I think beyond that, you're kind of borderline self-deluding. And you can look at the story of Sisyphus again in many different ways. His tried, his failed, this is the only way to convince himself. His tried, his failed, his acceptance the fact that he's a failure and he needs to survive. So he just changes his outlook, at the same time remembering that he's not going to go anywhere with this rock. It's having all these books here, and sometimes when, I write and I publish, and I say, well, my book is going to end up somewhere in here, and it'll take me like 10 hours to find out where exactly I put it. And I said, okay, well, this is how books ultimately, that's their fate. They'll end up on someone's desk, and they'll end up on someone's, shelf, and then end up somewhere in the garage, and then you'll be trashed. And I think it's a healthy way, for me at least, it's a healthy way of, because you don't give yourself, you don't make yourself too important. How do you think Sisyphus would respond to you if you were to ask him, what's the meaning of life? What should I do with my life? Because life is this rock that you have to push up. What is he going to tell you? That you'll be successful in eventually overpowering life. The only thing he'll tell you is pay attention to the way you grab the coffee mug and the way you place it in your hand and then you place it in your mouth and lips and all that stuff. That's the best you can do.